The abandonment I experienced by my family was rooted in a complex and painful situation that revolved around my sister, Hannah, and her divorce. It all began with a sudden email years later that detailed how I was blamed for the breakdown of her marriage, which occurred nearly 7 years ago. This email arrived unexpectedly, shedding light on the events that had dramatically changed my life. At the time of the incident, I was just 22 years old and had been living with my parents after finishing college, hoping to save money before moving out on my own. However, when Hannah's marriage to Pete ended, my life was turned upside down, leading to my family cutting ties with me entirely. Hannah, now 37, and I have always been distant due to our significant age difference. She married Pete, a 39-year-old certified dietitian she had been dating for 3 years, when she was 27. Their marriage seemed strong at first, but took a downward turn 3 years later when Hannah accused Pete of infidelity with one of my acquaintances, Emily, a 28-year-old who I had introduced to Pete in a professional capacity. Emily was trying to gain weight, and since Pete had expertise in nutrition, I thought he would be a suitable person to assist her. However, upon Hannah's emotional return home, she claimed that Pete had been cheating on her for 6 months and directly implicated me in the demise of her marriage. The accusations were shocking to me. I had always perceived Pete as devoted to Hannah, and I struggled to accept that he could betray her. My relationship with Emily was not particularly close, yet I firmly believed in her integrity and character, knowing she would never pursue a relationship with a married man. Despite my doubts about the validity of Hannah's claims, my parents expressed unwavering support for her without taking the time to question or investigate the situation. They sided with Hannah, dismissing any arguments I put forth, including the lack of concrete evidence regarding Pete's alleged infidelity. What transpired next was equally bewildering and heartbreaking. Hannah's emotional turmoil and accusations culminated in my parents deciding to confront me with their own outrage. Without any thorough discussion, they sided with Hannah's version of events, leading to my abrupt expulsion from the family home. It was bewildering how quickly sentiments shifted. One moment I was considered part of the family, and the next, I was viewed as the cause of their strife, an enemy in the eyes of my own parents. On that fateful day, Hannah stormed into the house, distraught and combative. She made it clear that she bore me responsible for her marital problems, simply because of my introduction of Emily to Pete. This accusation, a projection of her pain and disappointment, led my parents to agree with her without hesitation. They informed me that if I did not leave voluntarily, they would forcibly remove me from their home. The emotional impact was overwhelming. In a single day, I lost not only my family but also my home. Standing on the sidewalk amidst my belongings, I sobbed for what felt like an eternity, grappling with the shock and disbelief of the situation. With nowhere else to go, I sought refuge at a friend's house for the night. I reached out to my family incessantly in the days following my departure, desperately trying to communicate, but my efforts were met with silence. My friend graciously allowed me to stay with him while I searched for an apartment, but the reality was that my relationship with my family had soured irreparably. My parents had effectively made a decision to blame me for the fallout of Hannah's marriage, and they reinforced this by expressing their disgust over my supposed actions before I left. Their perspective baffled me, considering I had done nothing wrong and had not participated in any betrayal. In their eyes, I was the villain, and they resorted to blocking my number, leaving me feeling utterly isolated. Visits to my parents' home were met with hostility. My mother even threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. This experience opened my eyes to the gravity of their decision. It became evident that their allegiance lay with Hannah, their favorite child, while I was left to navigate the fallout alone. Reflecting on the family dynamics, it was clear that my parents never truly expected to have a second child, and this reality had lasting implications on our relationships. What began as an unexpected familial rift spiraled into a defining chapter of my life, where suddenly I found myself estranged from those I once considered irreplaceable. My parents had never truly considered the possibility of having a second child, so my existence often felt somewhat secondary in their eyes. Growing up, this lack of planning meant that I frequently found myself taking a backseat to the attention and resources that were reserved for my older sibling. Although I adapted to this dynamic and didn't pay much mind to it during those formative years, I was unaware of the profound implications it would have on my life later on. Reflecting on it now, with the benefit of hindsight, I realized that perhaps some signs of the eventual fallout were there, but I also believe that few, if any, in my situation would have anticipated the dramatic events that unfolded. After the whirlwind of change began, I spent weeks trying to unravel the situation on my own, as Hannah and my parents had essentially isolated me. Attempts to communicate with my family were futile. They had put up emotional walls that felt insurmountable. I was equally cut off from Pete, as he had made the decision to block me as well, an action that bewildered me. I found myself in a position where I could neither reach out to my parents nor to him. To complicate matters further, both Hannah and Pete had vacated their previous home, choosing instead to reside with their respective parents. This departure left me with no means of contacting anyone involved in the turmoil, prompting me to consider reaching out to Emily, a person I had previously been distant from, as a last resort to uncover the truth. Despite our lack of closeness, I felt compelled to meet with Emily and discuss the troubling circumstance that had arisen. I needed clarification on Hannah's claims regarding an affair and sought out Emily's perspective. To my relief, Emily categorically denied the allegations, her conviction in her denial resonating with me. She explained that her interactions with Pete had been limited and strictly professional, which alleviated my concerns about any inappropriate relationship between them. Furthermore, she shared personal details about her life, including her commitment to a steady boyfriend with whom she had been planning to get engaged in a matter of months. The evidence she provided, such as photographs of their time together, felt far more credible than anything Hannah had claimed, leading me to suspect that Hannah's narrative was severely distorted. While I had no tangible proof to confront my family with, I instinctively sensed that Hannah had fabricated the reasons behind the divorce. At that moment, my longing to reconnect with my family weighed heavily on me. Despite the hurt they had inflicted with their actions, I missed the sense of family and belonging that had once been a part of my life. Gradually, I learned to cope with the adversity. I found a new place to live and dedicated myself to my job, transforming my work into a sense of purpose. This shift became essential, not just for my mental well-being, but also for financial stability, allowing me to focus my energy on something productive rather than languishing in sadness. As the years passed, I gradually emerged from the shadows of that difficult period. Moving from a cramped apartment to a more spacious living situation represented a tangible step forward. Recently, I took a significant leap in my personal life by getting engaged to my girlfriend of 2 years. This milestone filled me with joy and optimism, especially when I posted about our engagement on social media. That simple announcement would soon prove to be more pivotal than I could have imagined. Shortly after sharing our engagement news, I received an unexpected email that contained a wealth of information about the true circumstances surrounding Hannah's divorce, information that finally provided answers I had long sought. The email even included supporting evidence to back up these revelations. It turned out that a broader audience had seen our engagement post because my fiancée Lisa had shared it publicly on Facebook, where she had a larger circle of acquaintances compared to Instagram. Among those who noticed was my ex-brother-in-law Pete. He had previously met Lisa at a medical seminar and had added her on Facebook, which ultimately led him back to me. What a small world it is. When Pete reached out to me a few days after our engagement announcement, he chose to do so anonymously via email. He explained later that this decision was made to mitigate any awkwardness, especially since years had passed since his divorce, and he didn't want to come off as someone still grappling with the past. His initial actions, blocking me, had added another layer of complexity to the situation, creating an internal conflict for him about reconnecting after all this time. Years ago, an email landed in my inbox that unraveled a complex web of deceit surrounding a family member. The contents of the email detailed a shocking narrative from 7 years prior, presenting undeniable proof that left me in sheer disbelief. Contrary to what my sister had long insisted, it was she who had cheated on Pete, her husband, rather than the other way around, as she claimed repeatedly. This revelation was not only a monumental lie but also unveiled an even more intricate betrayal. She had been having an affair with a close friend of mine. Frank, a cashier at the grocery store near Hannah's home at that time, was the individual involved. It struck me as incredibly surprising, as I had never made the connection and had never seen them together in any context. Their clandestine relationship had evidently been kept under wraps to a degree, but not so skillfully that Pete remained oblivious to the truth. When confronted about the affair, Hannah had the audacity to shift the blame onto me, asserting that I was responsible for introducing her to Frank. She claimed that I had mentioned his aspirations as a singer and urged her to help him, which led to their romantic involvement. In her fabricated narrative, she alleged that I even assisted them in maintaining their secret, a notion that was entirely unfounded. The sheer audacity of her lies was overwhelming. I had been completely unaware of any affair between Frank and Hannah, and her manipulation of the situation was infuriating. When Pete learned the truth, his reaction was one of outrage, resulting in him blocking my entire family. He later admitted that this decision was rash and born out of his anger, as he had acted without fully considering the consequences. The email he sent to me was intentionally impersonal, designed to avoid any immediate trace back to him. However, the evidence he provided was compelling, a collection of email screenshots between Hannah and Frank revealing their discussions about deceiving Pete, coupled with heartfelt confessions of love and plans for their secret meetings. Hannah had signed the emails with her middle name, a detail known to only a few, which left her little room to deny the contents. Piecing together the clues, I suspected that Pete had been the one to send me this eye-opening email. My instincts led me to scrutinize Hannah's Facebook friends, whereupon I finally identified Pete. After reaching out to him, we arranged to meet a few days later. During our conversation, he disclosed how he had learned about Hannah's true actions through Emily, a mutual acquaintance who had met him a couple of years ago. It became apparent that Emily had inquired about Pete's divorce, which led to their discussion about Hannah and her deceptive claims. Regrettably, I had advised Emily to keep my side of the story confidential, and I later regretted this decision, realizing that had I not done so, she might have disclosed the truth to Pete sooner. The timing of their encounter had been crucial. At that moment, Pete had wanted to reach out to me to clarify matters but hesitated due to his natural shyness. This inclination to avoid embarrassment on his part had complicated my situation immensely. Regardless, I found it in my heart to forgive him, understanding that we could unite to confront Hannah and dismantle her false narrative. Hannah had not only lied to my parents to secure financial support during her divorce but had also used me as a scapegoat in her attempts to manipulate the situation. She fully understood that revealing her infidelity would have drastic repercussions, and the last thing she wanted was to be held accountable for her actions. It was unfathomable that a person connected by blood could exhibit such selfishness, choosing deception over honesty. My parents, unaware of the truth, had been fed a continuous stream of Hannah's fabrications during her divorce proceedings. This manipulation had safeguarded her from the fallout that would have accompanied the discovery of her betrayal. The realization of her character left me grappling with the fact that the person I thought I knew had been living a lie, one that had now come to light in the most unexpected manner. She would have faced severe consequences, and she simply could not afford to take that risk. Unfortunately for her, the truth was finally out in the open now, and I was determined to use it to destroy her life just as she had done to mine all those years ago. The years had passed, and I had lost touch with my family, not having visited them for 7 long years. However, as luck would have it, they still resided in the same house. I had confirmed this information with an old neighbor before making my appearance and was relieved to find out that Hannah was still living with our parents. This revelation didn't surprise me. After all, Hannah had always preferred the comfort of her household and loathed undertaking any responsibilities. Given the chance to stay with her aging parents and make them handle all the chores for her, it was no wonder she had chosen to remain there. 2 days prior, Pete and I had shown up unannounced at their house. My mother opened the door, and before she could even process our sudden arrival, we walked right in. My father and Hannah were both in the living room, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like we were a happy family once again. However, that notion quickly faded as their expressions turned dark upon our entrance. My father immediately began to threaten us, stating that he would call the authorities if we didn't leave his house immediately. In response, I retorted that he was welcome to do as he pleased, but not before he reviewed the documents that we had come to present. The looks on my parents' faces were filled with utter confusion, but Hannah's expression was one of sheer panic, as if she might be sick. She excused herself, claiming she needed to retreat to her room. I initially thought she was attempting to escape, but the reality was that her fleeing held no practical purpose at this stage. Pete proceeded to reveal the divorce documents along with the incriminating screenshots of Hannah's emails with Frank, while I detailed the complete story. Additionally, Pete informed my parents about how Hannah had been forced to relinquish our family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond ring, in her settlement. The reason? She lacked the financial means to pay Frank the amount required due to her meager salary as a high school teacher, necessitating the sale of the cherished ring instead. As the gravity of the situation sank in, my parents' expressions morphed into horror, and this shocking revelation was the proverbial cherry on top of a disturbing cake. We watched the scene unfold as my dad demanded that Hannah provide an explanation for her actions. When she continued to fib and attempt to conceal the truth despite overwhelming evidence stacked against her, my father had finally reached his limit. He expelled her from the house, hastily packed her belongings, and handed her the bags as he ordered us all to leave his home. I didn't need to be told twice and quickly exited with Pete, all while Hannah pleaded and sobbed, desperately trying to convince our parents to let her remain in their home, mirroring the very same plight I had undergone years before. This was karma in its purest form, and it filled me with a sense of satisfaction I had not felt in a long time. Now, a couple of days later, Hannah had shown up at my place, demanding that I rectify things with our parents at once. I had no idea how she located me, but I made it clear that I owed her nothing anymore. She had ruined my life once, and I had simply returned the favor. In my view, this was a fair exchange. To my astonishment, it seemed she had exhausted any remaining pride, as she immediately burst into tears and accused me of being a monster. I brushed aside her theatrical display of emotions and shut the door firmly, tuning out her cries. With my headphones on, I immersed myself in music while Lisa, my fiancée, worked quietly in her study, ensuring that neither of us would be disturbed. Eventually, Hannah left us in peace, but not before leaving a message scrawled in marker on my door, labeling me as nothing more than a vengeful monster. I could not comprehend what was wrong with my actions. I felt no remorse whatsoever. To be honest, I believed I had merely acted in the same way she had treated me many years ago. The distinction being that while I had been honest in my endeavors, she had resorted to lies and deceit to undermine me. The question lingered, was I justified in ruining my sister's life and contributing to her being kicked out after 7 years of her having accused me of playing a part in her divorce? As an update, even a week after she had been expelled, Hannah had continued to harass me relentlessly. Even though a week has now gone by since Hannah was forcibly removed from our family home, the situation continues to escalate. She called me today for the 14th time, and I finally had to resort to threatening her with the possibility of involving the police. It was only after I raised that alarm that she finally stopped her relentless harassment. Honestly, I am baffled by how she even figured out my phone number and address, but at this moment, I am not particularly concerned with the details of that discovery. What bothers me more is how Hannah is attempting to manipulate my emotions, trying to elicit my sympathy due to her struggle as a school teacher. She claims that her salary is insufficient for her to maintain her living expenses. However, I find that hard to believe. It seems much more likely that she is simply frustrated by having to fend for herself in terms of securing her own living situation, paying for rent, utilities, and groceries after being expelled from our parents' home. Given the circumstances, I do not feel particularly sorry for her. Curiously, despite my efforts to block her number multiple times, Hannah has managed to bypass these barriers by having her friends initiate conference calls with me. Each time I think I've found a solution, she seems to discover another way to reach out. Meanwhile, my parents have compounded the issue. They are showing behavior that is just as troubling, if not worse than Hannah's. Recently, they discovered my engagement announcement on Facebook, and now they want to reinsert themselves into my life, expressing a desire to attend the wedding. What astounds me is their expectation that I would simply invite them after all that has transpired, especially since they have yet to issue any form of apology. It baffles me how they can act so brazenly, as if the past holds no weight. Despite their attempts to reconnect, I have chosen to ignore their messages and demands. Lisa and I have had some amusement reading through the texts they send, realizing the absurdity of their claims. They seem to be living in a bubble, completely oblivious to how their actions have affected me. In an unexpected turn of events, Hannah appeared at my house again after I had explicitly warned her that I would report her for harassment. It was just before I was about to leave for work when she decided to throw herself across the hood of my car, effectively blocking my departure. Her refusal to move forced my hand, and I ended up calling the police. They arrived and took her away while she screamed and protested, attempting to portray me as the villain in this scenario. Unfortunately for her, no one was sympathetic to her plight. After a prolonged process of pressing charges against her, I finally headed off to work, determined not to allow the morning's chaos to dampen my spirits. I had an inkling that my parents would bail Hannah out, considering that she has always been their favorite child. Sure enough, they didn't disappoint. After securing her release, they sent me a long, condescending message stating that I was being harsh over what they labeled as an honest mistake made nearly a decade ago. I found it utterly laughable, given that the actions they had taken against me were calculated and intentional. They were fully aware of the emotional and psychological damage they inflicted when they chose to evict me from the family home, leaving me without any support or a place to go. Now that the tables had turned, I felt no obligation to extend forgiveness or kindness in return. I replied to their message, emphasizing that they forfeited their right to dictate my choices many years ago and that they should stop living in their delusions. I have yet to block their numbers because I haven't found the time to review my messages thoroughly, but I plan to do so soon. My intention is to create a clean break from this tumultuous family dynamic once and for all. Upon returning home from work, I checked my social media accounts and was met with yet another lengthy message from my parents. Lisa and I went through this latest correspondence and could hardly contain our laughter. It became apparent that they remain completely unaware of my emotional state. Their words no longer cause me distress but rather amusement at how delusional they have become. They informed me that they have taken Hannah back into their home and have decided that both their children deserve a second chance, as if I had ever been in the wrong. In a bold move, they suggested that Lisa and I should come over for dinner to settle our differences like a family before my wedding, clearly assuming that reconciliation was possible. This presumption is not only misplaced but also emblematic of their inability to grasp the damage they have caused. It was audacious of them to presume that I would want them to be part of my wedding in any capacity. Their message, which I found to be completely absurd, sparked a shared moment of laughter between my friends and me. After we enjoyed that light-hearted exchange, I felt compelled to respond directly. I communicated clearly that I had no interest whatsoever in their invitation to the event, nor did I harbor any desire to reconnect with them after having distanced myself for the past 7 years. This separation had proven to be beneficial for my well-being, and I was grateful for the clarity it had provided. In my response, I made it unequivocally clear that I did not need them in my life any longer. Their attempts at reconciliation, framed as forgiveness, were unwelcome distractions from the peace I had cultivated. I preferred to let them continue their lives, pretending to be a happy family alongside my sister, just as they had been doing all this time. After sending that final message, I made a decisive move to block them entirely from my life. I was no longer interested in even the fleeting amusement that their antics might bring. I was finished with the whole situation. I know it is only a matter of time before they try to reach out to me again, but they should be aware that I will not be swayed. This time, I meant what I said, and I am resolute in my decision. My true family is now represented by Lisa, who has become my source of happiness and support. I have come to realize that my parents and sister have never been capable of looking beyond their own perspectives, and I remain skeptical that they ever will. Therefore, should they attempt to communicate with me in the future, they will be met with my legal representative, and I stand firm in that promise.